There are many variables that comprise how we see the world. Some of it is based on our childhood, on the way our parents raised us, and our socioeconomic status, and how our friends treated us in the playground. This makes human behavior and psychology infinitely complicated and infinitely fascinating. For me, two factors have shaped the way that I view the world overwhelmingly more than others. The first, as you most likely have noticed by now, is my Christian faith, which to the best of my ability guides everything that I do and all of the decisions that I make. I'm not ashamed of sharing my faith in Jesus Christ and what he has done for my life. It has been by far the best decision I've ever made, and I don't regret it for a second. Yet that factor was almost a precursor, and I would argue a result of the second biggest factor that shaped my worldview after that. That factor was my sister, who for the majority of her life has been diagnosed with severe autism. This wrench that was thrown into my family has been by far the biggest differentiator from our dynamic to that of other families. It has forever changed us all, most presciently my sister, obviously, who has had to overcome tremendous amounts of adversity to get to where she has been. Autism for our family was a very personal thing. It affected all of us on a very individualized level, and our family as a whole was isolated to a degree as a result. The kinship we have found among the autistic and disabled communities more broadly has given us a very vivid picture of just how hard and just how beautiful this arena of life is. The amount of horror that these families have had to deal with is nothing short of heartbreaking, and correspondingly, the amount of triumph that those who have overcome those horrors is nothing short of inspiring. Given this, a good portion of my life has been dedicated to helping people like my sister and helping families like my family. I did 10 MRFs in 12 hours, for example, and ran the New York City Marathon badly to raise money. I threw charity parties on college campuses and tried to shoot my shot with high school volleyball players to do so as well. I spent countless hours throughout the years volunteering at organizations like Autism Speaks, Rally Cap Sports, and the Special Olympics, and have helped my family and others bootstrap charities and organizations to help alleviate the burden that these families face. What I've learned throughout all of it, and most of my life, is that hardly anyone has ever cared. Autism and disabilities for the vast majority of my life has never been as sexy as a cause as that of cancer, for example, or homelessness, or world hunger. This is not at all disparaging to those causes, all of whom are more than worthy of their time in the sun, to be sure. It is simply to highlight just how hefty of a lift the cause that my family has adopted and forced into has been, and how far behind most of the world is to recognizing it. Yet, curiously to me, autism in recent years has experienced something that resembled a form of cultural ascendance and clout. The most uninteresting medical, political, and social issue for the majority of my lifetime is now getting put under a microscope. Quote, disability advocacy is on the rise. More people are examining what they're feeding and how they're medicating their children. Resources are becoming more abundant for children and families than ever before. The President of the United States has tasked his Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., to come up with a cure for the disability. Last week, Kennedy promised an answer to this question with new research by September. On one hand, these are all very good things and very positive developments. More people looking out for autistic people is long overdue. Financial, housing, and labor constraints being lifted to support this community have always been stretched far too thin. The response from our federal government, which has been absolutely putrid for the entirety of its existence, is finally picking up the pace. And again, these are good things. But on the other hand, there is a hidden variable to the quote-unquote autism epidemic that not many people, and I would argue none at all, have paid attention to. It seems that with all of the honest actors finally looking into the autism epidemic, of which I believe there are many, dishonest actors are coming on board as well. There is a hidden agenda that is coming along as a sidecar to this new rise in autism and disability advocacy, one that is causing far more harm than good to what the cause should be directed to, actual autistic and disabled people. And some might find this attitude to be cynical. I warrant and welcome that criticism. I'm not above anybody, no matter how close to the issue I am or personal the issue is to me, of which both apply. However, what I would charge back at that cynicism is to do your own research into a very simple question. Why is everyone suddenly interested in autism? And why now? It is that question that I explore in my upcoming third book, which I'm announcing today, called Spectrum of Lies: How Autism, Narcissism, Obscurity, and Social Justice are collectively disabling America. I spent nearly the past 4 years of my life obsessing over this exact question. I've read thousands of pages of books, hundreds of articles, examined countless studies, and have observed what's happening in our culture on a razor's edge. It is my contention that this book contains the answer to the question of the rise of autism advocacy, quote unquote, and the deceptive and fraudulent agenda that has been coupled to it. It is the hardest endeavor by far I've ever embarked upon. Yet it is also, if my beliefs are correct, which I believe they are, the best and most important creative work I've ever accomplished. What's also important to divulge as we walk through the overall context of this massive cultural shift, of which I'm dedicating all of this week's show to discussing, is that I did not set out to write this book. I didn't view it as a serious enough problem, as myself knowledgeable enough, or the harm to autistic and disabled people severe enough. But that all changed on a dime on September 18th, 2021, from a random Instagram message that proved in an instant that I was wrong on all three of those variables, and many more. That Saturday afternoon in my apartment in Austin, Texas was nothing out of the ordinary. I was watching Ohio State beat the brakes off of Tulsa, and on my way to get a very oversized burrito bowl from Chipotle. That Instagram message from a high school football teammate I hadn't talked to in years threw my entire day completely off. He had been nice enough to help coordinate some of my volunteer events back then and to take a legitimate interest in my family and our chosen cause. He knew more than most how deeply this cause resonated with all of us. The message he sent contained a video message of a woman at his college, of which he wanted my opinion on. So, reluctantly, I opened up her 20-minute long post and began to listen. It's not at all an exaggeration to say that that Instagram video completely altered the way I viewed our world. The woman in the video, a completely able-bodied and minded person, used her 20-minute video to go on a social justice-fueled tirade about her quote-unquote autism and how her university was culpable in aggravating her systems, so she said. I found this whole video strange at the minimum and offensive at the maximum. My sister cannot operate an Instagram account, form a coherent argument for 20 minutes, or get offended about anything. Whatever this woman had, it clearly wasn't autism. My sister had that, not her. But yet, mind-blowingly, the video, which went somewhat viral, served to affirm everything this woman had stated. Most people in the comments agreed with her, saying she was, quote, brave and courageous for calling out this so-called oppression. The few brave souls that offered critique were shouted down and told to repent for their sins. Not at all dissimilar to people who didn't post a black square on their Instagram, call every critique of the government of Israel anti-Semitism, or to call a biological man a woman. After I put my brain back together after having that video blow it to bits, the main question I kept coming back to was simple. Why? Why on earth would self-diagnosing yourself as autistic be in any way preferable? There are no advantages at all to being disabled in any fashion. That's why the word, by definition, deliberately undoes the word ability. When looked at objectively, autism and disability more broadly is a biological tragedy. My sister, a 26-year-old woman, has the mental capacity of someone a fourth her age. She struggles to pay a cashier at a grocery store or tell a waitress at a restaurant what she wants for dinner. She has incredibly hindered social awareness. She often talks too loud and about inappropriate things. She will most likely never work an autonomous full-time job, much less have a career. She can barely cook anything that can't be put in a Tavola oven or a microwave or a toaster. She barely has the ability to care for herself, much less others. She will most likely never marry or have children. She will never own a home or a business. She will always have to rely on others for most everything. Her freedom, while existing naturally due to her God-given rights, for sure, is, by necessity and for her own well-being, restricted. In addition, my sister, like many people with autism, was not good at regulating her emotions, as I said earlier. She would often scream and yell when she was upset. She self-harmed when it got worse, mostly resorting and scratching and biting herself and other people. She still has the scars to prove it. However, my sister had it easy when compared to others. Some of her friends with more severe disabilities can't bathe, eat, or use the restroom without assistance. They break things, foam at the mouth, and beat other people. Their caretakers and parents, if you put them on a polygraph, would probably admit to being afraid of them in these episodes, because I know I was. These adverse effects spread outwards towards the broader family. In my case, for example, I often felt neglected by both of my parents, causing me to become even more independent and stubborn than I already was. This wasn't intentional, and might not even be true, and it probably isn't, but it's something that is incredibly hard to comprehend as a young man. This led me, obviously, to make some awful decisions that had lasting consequences. I refused to ask for guidance or help often, which I directly blame myself for as I slipped into pornography addiction, social isolation, financial mismanagement, and nearly failing out of college. My parents and brother had their own struggles, to be sure, not at all because of my sister, but because we were all doing the best we could with what we had in a very tough situation. If you are a top-performing, high-earning man in a corporate job, I have a free gift for you, the Value Economist Handbook. In this book, you'll find a bulletproof, crystal clear, and step-by-step roadmap to build your values, systematize them into an unbeatable portfolio, and leverage them to create an unshakable identity that leads to fulfillment, meaning, and purpose. So, if you want a free copy, go down to the description below, fill out your information, and we'll send one over to you right away. Now, let's get back to today's video. Due to hardly anyone understanding autism or disabilities, the amount of discrimination my sister and family faced was constant. Whenever my sister would get worked up at a restaurant, for example, the glares from surrounding table burned through our skulls. Why don't they just throw all the retards in the corner, they would say. I heard all the jokes aimed at my sister, all the shunning that my mom got from other women claiming to be her, quote, friends, all the looks of pity our family got whenever we went anywhere. And then there are people like this woman on Instagram, ranting about, quote, harmful autistic behaviors when she's attending frat parties and getting drunk with her friends. How dare she? How despicable. How evil. After I came back down to earth, I opened my laptop and began to do some research. Was this actually happening? Well, it turns out it was. Even more unbelievably, I had begun to notice it subliminally throughout my entire life. For example, the number of autism diagnoses when my family started volunteering was about 1 out of every 150 people. Now it's estimated that it's 1 out of 20 people. Organizations like Autism Speaks got into other types of activism, co-branding with and promoting organizations around social movements. They made pledges involving things like quote-unquote climate justice and quote racial equity, two things that have nothing to do at all with autism. More importantly, the wording on the Autism Speaks website changed. No longer were the numbers representing people diagnosed with autism. Now, they're representing people who, quote, identified with autism. And it's that last point that's the most striking. Again, why on earth would someone want to, quote, identify as someone with a severe mental disability? The answer escaped me. And yet this began to expand beyond disability the more that I looked into it. Why have the rates of, quote, anxiety and, quote, depression skyrocketed, for example? And more insidiously, why are they viewed as a badge of honor? And finally, why is autism the focal point of all of this? Why do people not, quote, identify with cerebral palsy or Down syndrome or mental retardation or schizophrenia? These instances, these exclamations of a new, quote, identity, all have 3 common traits. First, they have a person who is bold enough to say that they are something. Second, they have a group of people that rush in to affirm them, regardless of how dubious that something might be. And third, there is swift and unrelenting punishment to anyone that dares to question who that person says that they are. When you put it that way, it isn't perplexing and strange at all that this is happening, because for the last decade, America has been driven to obsession by this. A rising sense of entitled individualism in relation to identity has taken our entire culture by storm. This rise of entitled individualism has taken many forms: gender, race, sexual orientation, etc. No longer are these things viewed as a simple feature of a complicated system. Now, they have become the system itself. They have become the sun in which every person in this movement rotates around. Everything else is shoved aside, relegated to orbiting around that singular focal point. But this trend centered around disabilities is different. Very different. There is nothing a person of an identity group can't do within the confines and constraints of their abilities, biology, talents, and work ethic. A person is capable of pushing to the extent of what they can do to the extent they want to do it. The beautiful thing about humans is that we have more power than we realize. But a disabled person? They are confined and constrained by their abilities, biology, talent, and work ethic. They are not capable of pushing to the extent of what they can do to the extent they want to do it. Their power is much less than an able person. This is a cruel and unfair reality, the most cruel and unfair in the world that we must face. We must accept. The line must be, and for the longest time was, drawn clearly in the sand. But it's not anymore. Through a long march, it has been blurred and muddied. It is on the way to becoming nearly indistinguishable from any other group identity that we have in America. The only difference, the key difference, is that for the first time, we are making an empowered victim group of people who have no ability to transcend that status. That is what makes them victims, after all. This is the lie of social justice, and what has made it the most divisive force in America for the past decade. The biggest lever for its advocacy is its rapid spread inside of our institutions: corporate boardrooms, HR departments, college admissions offices, political sloganeering. Once a medical diagnosis, social justice has co-opted disability as a political tactic. The most recent example of this outside of disability but in the culture, transgenderism. made us question what the differences between men and women were, castrated and mutilated countless numbers of children, and waged a war on truth. It nearly succeeded in inverting our culture, on plunging us into total madness. But it will be nothing compared to its successor, transableism. If we thought telling the difference between a man and woman was hard, wait until we have to tell the difference between someone who is able and disabled, mentally ill and well. The next wave of social justice is here. And like all fraudulent social justice movements before, no actual justice is being served to the targeted group. Disabled people are not getting justice. They're getting the exact opposite, a corrosive and disingenuous injustice. They're being used as a weapon for others, without an identity to fall into, to force their way into a hierarchy of non-existent oppression and victimhood. It is them that are and will continue to suffer. And contrary to the social justice movements of the past, this left tremendously negative effects on the rest of us. It wouldn't matter, for example, if we had a president who wasn't white, a man, straight, or identified with the gender they were born with. It's happened with one of those groups before, after all, twice. But it would definitely matter if the president was mentally disabled. Could you imagine a person like my sister and her friends being responsible for negotiating trade agreements with world leaders, leading military engagements, handling nuclear codes, setting tax brackets, keeping society orderly and safe? Furthermore, what happens if this goes mainstream? Will and should we have to deal with mentally disabled accountants or firefighters or pilots or surgeons? The definitive answer is no. We should not, because merit matters. Ability matters. Quote, diversity shouldn't be a factor, but it increasingly is, in the most manipulative and pervasive ways possible. The weakest people in society, the ones with no excuse for that weakness, are finding a way to increase their own power and prestige by exploiting those suffering the cruelest natural injustice on earth, the disabled, those without the ability to pursue human flourishing. This cannot stand, which is why I believe my third book, Spectrum of Lies, is important. It comes out 2 months from tomorrow, on June 28th, 2025. I'm biased, of course, but I deem it to be a very important read. I love the autistic and disabled communities, and I love my sister. There is no group I hate more than those who use both to their narcissistic ends. And for all who are skeptical, I have over 1,200 citations in the back proving my point. I welcome your criticism. It will only make my case stronger.